took a drive late one night. What happened will haunt me for the rest of my life. Oh, before I forget, man, I was wondering if you could help me with something. The cashier, an acne-riddled kid who looked to be in his late teens or early 20s, looked up from shoving the bag of potato chips, 2 sodas, and a pack of Lucky Strikes into a plastic bag. For a moment, he just stood there, seemingly frozen in mid-action. Then he finally answered, "Yeah, what's up, man?" I let out a barely perceptible sigh. I'd been half afraid that I would be told to take a long walk off a short pier, to put it politely. Feeling relieved, I reached into my back pocket for what was there. You see, I seem to have, well, sort of gotten lost out here. I decided to take a late-night drive and ended up getting turned around on all these 2-lane back roads. I unfolded the map and set it on the counter so he and I could both see it before continuing. So I was hoping you could point out on here roughly where we are, and more importantly, the way to get back to the main road. There was another long stretch of silence, and then the kid began to laugh, softly at first, and then louder. "Dude, a paper map?" he managed out between wheezes. "Are you for real? What year do you think this is, 1993? For my part, I simply let out a resigned sigh. I'd had a bad feeling I would be getting this sort of reaction from someone his age, and it looked like I'd been proven correct. Can't say I didn't see it coming. He wiped tears from the corners of his eyes and looked at me. "Seriously, bro, don't you have GPS in your car or something?" Immediately, I hooked a thumb over my shoulder, pointing out the glass entry door at the beige sedan sitting at the gas pumps. "Not in a Honda Accord from 1979, I replied simply. As he looked behind me out the door, I could see he wanted to make another quip. Probably something about how I should buy a newer car or something. Thankfully, though, he kept it to himself. Instead, he leaned over the map and, still chuckling softly to himself, began looking at it. A few moments later, he snapped his fingers. "Ha! I still got it," he said proudly, then pushed his finger down near the middle of the map and looked up at me. "We're right about here, roughly 6 or 7 miles outside Placer." I leaned over the counter to see as he drew his finger away. "Here?" He nodded, and I pulled a pen out of my pocket, circling the area as a reminder once I left, then examined the map further. "Okay, so it seems I could take more than a few roads to get back to Interstate 5, right?" The kid nodded again, clearly already bored with the unusual interaction by the slightly annoyed look which had begun to cross his face. "Sure," he said simply, then placed my bagged items on top of the map. "That'll be $14.50 for this, and $28.50 for the gas." I reached into my pocket and pulled my wallet out, withdrawing 3 20s and handing them to him. The register let out its trademark ding as it shot open, and he placed the bills in it before pulling out and handing me my change. Placing it and my wallet back into my pocket, I picked up the bag and folded the map back up. "Thanks for the help," I said as I turned to head out the door. "Yeah, no problem," I heard him mutter at me as I crossed to the front door and pushed it open. A small bell hung from the inside handle jangled as I stepped outside and let the door swing shut behind me. The sounds of the refrigerators humming and the fluorescent lights softly buzzing was replaced by those of a summertime forest at night. Crickets and cicadas buzzed loudly in the grass around the store, almost overwhelming the buzzing sound of the lights over the pumps. The sound of an owl hooting loudly echoed through the trees, followed by the loud call of what had to be an elk. I inhaled the clean air before heading down the steps for my car. Pulling open the driver's door, I took one last look around before dropping into the driver's seat. "So, "Did you find out where we are?" asked a voice from the passenger seat. For a split second, a wave of confusion and panic swept over me, and I spun in my seat. It was immediately replaced by a wave of embarrassment, amplified as my friend began to let out a deep laugh. "Dude, were you in there that long that you forgot I was out here waiting for you?" Not wanting to admit I had done just that, I shook my head. "Nah, bro, not that. Just dealing with the kid in there was a major headache." He nodded sympathetically. Craig was one of my close friends. Ever since we'd met each other, we'd immediately clicked and had stuck with each other from that point on. And one thing we both loved to do was take late-night drives to nowhere, simply driving around with no destination in mind, listening to the radio, and occasionally sharing a joint one of us would buy. This was the first time we've ever gotten lost, though. I reached into the bag, pulling out the bottle of Mr. Pibb and handing it to him. "Here," I said simply, before pulling the Lucky Strikes out and chucking the rest into the back seat. Pulling the key from my pocket, I slid it into the ignition and turned it. The car's buzzer sounded as the dash lights came on. A moment later, the inline four quietly rumbled to life with its traditional burble. Tearing open the packaging, I pulled a cigarette from the pack and stuck it into the corner of my mouth before reaching to push in the car's cigarette lighter. As I did, I shot a glance back towards the store and froze. A small shiver shot down my spine as I realized the kid was standing at the door and staring out at us. What the actual hell? Craig caught my gaze and turned to look himself. "Dude, what the hell is his problem?" I shook my head as the lighter popped back out, signaling it was ready to use. I pushed the glowing red coil against the tip of the smoke for a moment until it was lit, then placed it back in its slot. I pulled it from my lips and exhaled a cloud of smoke before answering, feeling more than a bit unnerved. "I don't know, but honestly, man, that's more than a bit creepy." I shot one last glance. The kid hadn't even blinked once. He was just staring with an off-putting intensity out the glass. "Come on, let's get out of here," Craig said, echoing the thoughts swimming through my mind. I put the car into first gear and eased off the clutch. The car began to roll forward. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him turn and shoot the bird at the kid as we slid out from under the lights into the dark. "Prick," I heard him mumble. I turned the car left and began heading back the way we came. "Well, the good thing is, I did find out where we are," I said after a minute. "Thank fuck for that," Craig replied with relief in his voice. I nodded, taking another drag of my cigarette as I rolled down the window, flicking ash into the night. Little did we know, the true horror of our journey was only beginning. The road stretched out before us, an endless ribbon of black asphalt cutting through the dense forest. I kept my foot steady on the accelerator, the Honda's engine humming smoothly. The music from the mixtape filled the car, synthesizers and pulsing beats echoing the rhythm of our journey. Craig rolled down his window, sticking his head out to whoop and holler into the night. I shook my head, unable to keep from grinning at his antics. Friggin' goofball. The playful mood helped settle my mind, and I felt myself relax into the seat, the tension flowing out of my body and out the window. For a few minutes, that's how things went. The road stretching out ahead of us, and then disappearing into the blackness behind, the music blasting from the speakers, and the soft roar of the engine in the background. I shot another look at the backlit clock. Now it read 5 minutes to 3. We should be at the highway in a minute. The thought released the last wisps of tension in my body. I fumbled into the back seat for the bag, catching it with the tips of my fingers. I pulled my bottle of soda from it, and holding the bottle to the steering wheel, cracked the cap. I lifted it to my lips and took a swig, taking my eyes off the road for a split second to tilt my head back. I looked back at the road and nearly spit it all out onto the windshield. In the second I'd stopped looking, a figure had stepped out onto the road. "Fucking hell!" I shouted, jamming my feet on the brake and clutch as hard as I could. The rear wheels locked up, and the ear-piercing sound of squealing tires filled the cabin. To my horror, the tail end of the car began sliding out. Oh hell, no. For a few seconds, the world around us became a blur of shapes and colors, and I feared at any moment we'd smash into a tree or begin rolling. Thankfully, the car finally came to a stop with a screech of protest from the suspension. We were facing back the way we'd come. I could tell from the black lines on the road, which had once been the rubber of my tires. I gripped the steering wheel with almost a death grip, my heart furiously pounding in my chest. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps. There was no movement in the car for a few seconds before Craig reached forward and snapped the music off. "Dude, what the fuck?" he shouted at me, his face looking as pale as mine must be. I didn't say a word to him. Instead, I pulled up on the handbrake, ripped off my seatbelt, and practically kicked the door open. Stepping out onto the pavement, I moved to the front of the car on unsteady legs until I was squarely in between the headlight beams. I looked around, first at the road ahead, then at the forest on either side. There was nothing there. What the... I turned and looked behind me, over the roof of the car. The red glow of the taillights illuminated a few feet ahead, but beyond that, nothing but blackness. I turned again, looking out at the darkness beyond the branches. No movement disturbed the bushes and trees, and aside from the quiet hum of the idling engine, it was eerily silent. I shook my head. Did I just imagine things? No. I knew for a fact I didn't hallucinate. There was someone there. The sound of the passenger door opening made me turn, seeing Craig step out of the car. Leaving the door open, he immediately came over to me, his eyes wide with confusion and worry. "You have exactly 20 seconds to explain to me what the hell just happened before I lose it, bro," he exclaimed. For a second, I fought to find my voice, then I answered. "Someone... Dude, I'm not crazy. Someone stepped out of the woods and onto the road. It looked like a chick. I thought I was gonna freaking hit her." I realized I'd been holding in a breath and let it out, trying desperately to get myself to relax. Craig gave me a confused look. "You serious, man?" I nodded. He pulled the flashlight he'd used to look at the map from his pocket and flicked it on, aiming it first at the tree line on one side of the road, then the other. After doing this a few times, he turned back to me. "Well, whoever it was, they're not there anymore." His brow furrowed. "But why would a chick be out here in the middle of nowhere?" he muttered, more to himself than me. I still answered, "I don't know, man. It's freaking Josephine County. For as many good people live out here, there's also a bunch of weirdos." Craig snorted and shook his head. "Let's just get back in the car and get the hell out of here." But as we climbed back into the Honda, an ominous feeling crept over me. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was very wrong out here on this lonely stretch of road. And as I shifted the car into gear and pulled back onto the asphalt, I had no idea just how terrifying things were about to become. As we drove on, the feeling of unease continued to grow inside me. I couldn't shake the image of that woman stepping out onto the road. What was she doing out here in the middle of nowhere? And where had she disappeared to so quickly. I glanced over at Craig, who seemed lost in thought as he stared out the passenger window. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the rumble of the engine and the whisper of the tires on the pavement. Minutes ticked by, and still there was no sign of the highway. The road just kept winding through the dark forest, the trees pressing in close on either side. I was starting to get seriously worried. We should have reached the interstate by now. "Hey, Jake?" Craig asked suddenly, his voice tinged with concern. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road ahead. "Shouldn't we be to the highway by now, or at least see the lights of passing cars?" He was right. The lights of cars and trucks flashing by on the freeway should be visible through the darkness. I clearly remembered looking in my side view mirror as we turned onto this road from the highway, seeing the ever-present white and red glows zipping by both ways at close to the same distance we were now. But that wasn't the case anymore. All I could see in front of us was darkness. Darkness, and the woods on either side of the road. For a moment, I lifted my foot off the accelerator, letting the car slow down a little as my brain whirred. He's got to be mistaken. Hell, I've got to be mistaken. We just haven't gotten close enough to the highway yet. You know these old roads, Derek. They often end up longer than they first look. Feeling somewhat relieved by the thought, I said it out loud to Craig. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't completely convinced. And if I was being honest with myself, I couldn't completely convince myself either. It was as if seeing that woman step into the road had shaken me more than I'd first realized. Pushing back down on the gas, I shifted into fourth gear and watched the speedometer flirt with 55 miles an hour. For a few minutes more, neither one of us saw anything as we drove in tense silence. And then, Craig let out a cry. There, a light. For a moment, a surge of hope welled up inside me, and I craned over the steering wheel, looking to see the highway. But it was dashed as I saw it was only a streetlight, standing solitary guard on the side of the road like a sentry. Beneath it stood an old, worn sign, which seemed to have been shot at many times with both BB pellets and actual bullets. I slowed the car as it came towards us so I could read it, and felt a wave of confusion fall over me. Golden, 2 miles. The fuck? Craig breathed out as he read the sign. It passed by us, the streetlight momentarily bathing the interior of the car in light and showing the bewildered look on his face. How the hell did we end up by Golden? Golden is a ghost town, one which attracts visitors every year to check out the standing buildings. It was a mining town which had a population of a few hundred people, but once the prospects dried up in the early to mid-20th century, it became the ghost town it is today. Its biggest claim to fame nowadays was being featured on Ghost Adventures a few years back. Craig repeated his question, but I wasn't able to answer him. My thoughts were racing inside my head. There's no freaking way. Golden is miles to the north of Placer. There are no roads connecting the two areas, from what I saw on the map. Not to mention, we've been driving in a straight line since leaving the gas station. I honestly don't know, man, I finally answered, my voice conveying how rattled I truly was. In the car's dark interior, I saw him put his head in his hands. I fumbled for my pack of cigarettes, pulling another out with slightly unsteady fingers and pushing in the cigarette lighter. A moment later, the turnoff for the ghost town flashed by on the right. I saw the dark, hulking shape of the church's spire rising out of the gloom for a moment. Then it was behind us. The lighter popped out, and I pressed it to the cigarette, lighting it and putting the lighter back. I needed something to calm my nerves. But as I exhaled a cloud of smoke, A terrible realization began to dawn on me. We were trapped in some kind of endless loop, doomed to drive this stretch of road over and over again. And as the ghostly streetlight and bullet-riddled sign appeared ahead of us once more, I knew with sinking certainty that our night of terror was far from over. The sign for Golden flew by again, and a shiver shot up my spine. "This isn't good, bro," Craig said from the passenger seat. I agreed with him, but didn't say it out loud. I kept my foot hard down, the engine now roaring as I shifted into fifth gear, the speedometer hitting 80. The turn-off appeared again, and what I saw made me want to scream. The woman had gotten closer to the road, and she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, I saw others, the outlines of other people, dozens, possibly more. They all stood facing the road, watching us fly by, and then they disappeared into the rear-view mirror. "Fuck," I breathed out, as the light and sign flashed by yet again. This time, the mass of people had gotten even closer to the road. The woman stood in front of them all, and for a split second, the headlights fully illuminated her. Another flash of ice shot through my veins as I saw the river of blood pouring down the front of her nightgown, one that looked to be decades old. "What the hell do we do?" Craig asked me, his voice steady, yet filled with the same fear I felt. I just shook my head. "I don't know, man," was all I could say. The streetlight began to appear again when I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, causing me to nearly slam on the brakes in surprise. I fumbled to pull it out, seeing Craig look over at me. I texted Vanessa when we stopped, told her to reply back in a few minutes. Now, I think I'm going to tell her to call the cops or something. He didn't reply, instead turning to look out the windshield at the approaching light. Flicking my eyes from the phone screen to the road and back, I forced myself to not look at the turn-off as we zoomed past the light. I didn't want to see how close those ghosts, demons, whatever they were, had gotten to the road. I flipped my finger across the screen, pushing away the lock and tapping on the messenger icon as the light began to appear once more. Vanessa's message automatically opened, and for a moment, relief like I'd never felt surged through me at the small bit of normalcy I had in my grasp. But then I froze. I didn't even look up at the road. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the single sentence, reading and rereading it. A wave of confusion passed over me, enough that I spoke aloud. "The fuck?" Craig spoke up. "What? What'd she say?" I didn't answer him. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour trying to understand, but it was like I was hitting a mental wall. I tried to think of something else as another thought came to me, but again the same block was coming to me. As it did, a new wave of fear began to rise up in me, one for an entirely new reason than the terrifying loop flying by outside. The speedometer now showed we were doing 90. And then Craig spoke. "Can I ask you a question, man?" Ice filled every vein in my body, not at his question, but at his voice. It was different. Gone was the fear and tension he'd had not even a minute ago. Now he just sounded flat. No, not flat. I couldn't tell why, but the way his tone was almost made me feel like he was smiling. Another shiver cascaded up my spine as I finally forced myself to answer, my mouth dry as cotton. "What?" he answered as we began to fly under the streetlight. "Are you scared?" For whatever reason, the question made me turn to look at him, just as the light whizzed over us. For a split second, the car's interior became illuminated again. My eyes locked with his. The light flew by. The turn-off appeared again, and for a moment, my eyes flicked up to see that the woman was right next to the road, bathed completely in the headlights. I finally caught a glimpse of her face, and then I was screaming, my fingers tearing at the door handle as the car swerved to the right. I saw a tree flying towards the windshield. I didn't think. I just forced the door open and leapt out. The ground rapidly flew up to meet me. Darkness. I woke up in a hospital room, a bandage covering my head and one arm in a sling. My chest felt like it was on fire as well. The first thing I saw was Vanessa, who burst into tears and wrapped her arms around me. A few moments later, the doctor came in. He told me that I was a lucky man. Apparently, I'd gotten away with only a gash in my head requiring staples, severely bruised ribs, and a broken arm. Shocking for having dove out of a car at what appeared to be tremendous speed, he said, raising an eyebrow. Then he told me the police wanted to speak to me. The officers asked many questions. I told them exactly what had happened. Well, except for two small details. They appeared to take my account seriously and promised to look into it. "We've had some reports similar to yours, sir," one of them answered tentatively. Then they told me how I'd been found. How a father and son who owned a gas station nearby had been out driving and had come across first my destroyed Honda, which had wrapped itself around a tree, and then me, lying unconscious in the grassy ditch. They didn't say who the father and son were, but I had a fair idea, at least about the son. That night was 3 months ago. I've been at home, resting and healing this entire time. It's given me plenty of time to think, plenty of time to process everything. I try not to think about that night, about any of it. I feel like I'll go insane if I do, especially after the police told me that they found nobody else at the scene of the wreck, only the passenger door hanging open. But I've had to dwell on it after receiving an email from an unknown address, one claiming to be from the son, the kid I saw in the gas station that night. He told me things that his father told him he'd seen for years on that road, things the son didn't believe at all, until that night, when he looked out the door at my car. That's when he'd frantically called his father. As I type this out, I feel myself begin to violently shake, remembering the woman's face, indeed a ghost, as it flashed in the headlights. The look of horror plastered there as she frantically waved at me to get my attention. The same look the others must have had, remembering turning to look at Craig as the light flickered over us and seeing the smile on his face. A smile wider than any human being's could possibly be, filled with shark-like teeth as black eyes stared hungrily at me. The same shark-like smile the kid said he'd been flashed as I pulled away. But mostly, I remember the single line of text Vanessa sent me. The message that caused me to rack my brain, trying frantically to recall any memories of my supposed friendship with the figure sitting opposite me in the car. The words that filled me with horror as I realized I couldn't think of a single one. The 3 words that will remain burned into my memory forever. The question I have no answer for. Darling, who's Craig? For me, life was a whirlwind of lights and smoke, music and men. I lived in a broken-down shanty near North Edsa, crammed into a tiny, closet-like space with several other women. We slept on mats spread over the dirt floor, sharing the room with mange-infested dogs, flea-bitten cats, and cockroaches that scurried freely. My wardrobe was a mismatched collection of cheap, skimpy skirt, tank tops, and low-quality heels you could get for next to nothing in Quiapo. After long nights at the bar, dancing, exposing myself, and sometimes spending time in back rooms with drunk, lecherous men, I'd earned just enough money to scrape by. My eyes, hollow and lifeless like a dead fish, often stared blankly at the ceiling during those moments. But last night I managed to save enough for a trip to the thrift store. The nights in Manila had grown colder, and I needed a sweater. The streets reeked of garbage, human urine, and the thick smog from jeepneys, tricycles, and trucks. I walked past them, searching until I found a street lined with second-hand clothes stalls. The clothing here was most likely donated by American charities, but had somehow ended up in the hands of greedy merchants eager to make a few extra pesos. Among the piles of tattered and stained clothes, I spotted it, a sweater that stood out like a pearl in murky waters. Soft and pristine, it looked untouched by the filth surrounding it. I couldn't understand why no one had bought it yet. Its fabric was rich, as soft as rabbit fur, and it felt warm to the touch. Across the front was a large pouch pocket where you could tuck your hands. It was inside this pocket that I found the note, a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper. The smell of it reminded me of old libraries with their dust-covered, decaying books. Scrawled on the paper were the following words: Where? 67th Banawi Street. Pay 1,000 pesos per night. Job: lie on the bed. From 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., keep your eyes shut. Never open them. Past 3 a.m., your money will be on the dresser. Banawi Street. The note didn't specify a city, but that street name was familiar. One of my roommates used to visit clients there. It was in Quezon City, where wealthier people lived. I stuffed the note into my pocket and paid for the sweater. Just 30 pesos. It was a steal for something so beautiful. As I put it on, the soft fabric clung to my skin, making me feel radiant, like a starlet from a Capamelia drama. And in my pocket, the note offered something far more tempting. An easy job, high-paying and mysterious. These kinds of opportunities rarely came by. 1,000 pesos a night could change everything. I could leave this life behind, go to college, and find a real job. That night, after asking around and piecing together directions, I found the house. 67th Banawi Street. The neighborhood was upper class, but the house itself was in shambles. A single-story structure surrounded by a short, rusted wire fence. The yard was overgrown with weeds that jutted out like wild, unkempt hair. Mold crept across the walls, shingles were missing, and the paint was peeling. The windows were caked with dust, obscuring any view inside. Still, it was a mansion compared to my shanty. As I approached, the patio light flickered weakly. When I knocked, the door creaked open, as though it had been left ajar. I called out. No answer. The air inside was heavy with the stench of decay, like wet laundry left to rot. I stepped inside cautiously, leaving the door slightly open so the patio light could illuminate my way. The floor groaned under my weight, and the damp walls seemed to close in around me, oppressive and suffocating. It reminded me of a body that had been found in the sewage canal near my shanty, bloated, bruised, and decomposing. I moved past a dark living room. A battered couch sat before a dusty TV. On the coffee table were an ashtray and a few empty cans. The room reeked of cat urine and dried feces. No one was there. I tried flipping the light switches, but none worked. Down the hallway I noticed a faint pale light glowing beneath a closed door. I called again. Nothing. I grasped the doorknob, ignoring the greasy residue it left on my palm, and pushed it open. Inside was a single bed covered in drab gray sheets. Beside it stood a dresser with a glowing digital clock. 10:50 p.m. I hesitated. The eerie silence wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. I considered leaving, but the promise of 1,000 pesos held me in place. It was too much money to walk away from. So I lay on the bed, gripping the note tightly in my hands. 10:54 p.m. The house was unnervingly silent, as though muffled by an invisible hand. 10:56 p.m. My heart pounded in my chest, reverberating in my ears. 10:59 p.m. I shut my eyes tightly. Then it began. At exactly 11 p.m., the air in the room shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. Even though my eyes were shut, I could feel it, a presence hovering inches from my face. The tiny hairs on my forehead stood on end as I felt its breath, slow and labored, like it was struggling to breathe through its nose. The smell hit me next, sour, rotten, and metallic. Blood. My body froze, paralyzed by fear. My heart thrashed wildly in my chest, like a bird trapped in a cage. Sweat trickled down my back, itching and crawling, but I dared not move. The thing stayed there, its breath steady and unrelenting. Every nerve in my body screamed for release, but I clung to one thought: never open them. Seconds stretched into minutes, hours into eternity. My joints ached, muscles cramped, and my lungs begged for air untainted by the stench of decay. Still, I didn't move. At 3 a.m., the digital clock beeped, breaking the silence. The presence vanished instantly. I waited, trembling, until my body felt like my own again. Then slowly, I opened my eyes. On the dresser lay exactly 1,000 pesos. I grabbed the money and fled, not daring to look back. A week passed, but the memories refused to fade. The sour breath, the smell of blood, the unseen presence. Its closeness to my face haunted me. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Perhaps fear had conjured it, but my senses told me otherwise. Most of all, I couldn't stop wondering, what would have happened if I had opened my eyes? I returned to the house out of desperation. Desperation for answers, yes, but also for the money. Life as a call girl left you numb to fear. When danger becomes part of your daily routine, you stop caring how close you come to it. Sleeping with strangers, risking abuse, or worse, it becomes a way of life. And yet, I had survived so far. Perhaps that was why I convinced myself that I could return. After all, hadn't nothing happened to me last time? The evening I returned, the house looked exactly as it had before. The same cracked walls, the same flickering patio light, the same eerie silence that swallowed the air as soon as I stepped inside. The only change was the bed, still crumpled from my previous use, as if no one had been inside since I left. I lay down, my heart thudding against my ribs like a caged animal. The digital clock glared at me from the dresser, an unflinching reminder of the hours ahead. I shut my eyes seconds before 11 p.m., bracing myself. And then it came. The presence was there, just as I had remembered. Its breathing was slow, labored, and chillingly close to my face. The foul stench of blood and decay filled the room, making my stomach churn. This time, however, fear did not paralyze me as it had before. I was still terrified, yes, but curiosity gnawed at me, overriding the dread. What was it? Who or what was this thing that haunted the house? I decided to do something I hadn't dared the first time. Slowly I raised one hand toward my face, trembling with fear. My muscles screamed with tension, my fingers slick with sweat. The thing's breathing remained steady, unfazed by my movements, as if it didn't care what I did, so long as I didn't open my eyes. My fingers made contact. What I felt was cold, sticky hair. My breath hitched, and for a moment I thought I might faint, but I pressed on, my fingers trembling as they moved across the surface of its scalp. The hair was wet and matted, and as my hand slid lower, I felt the jagged edges of torn skin. It was a head, a severed head. I bit down on a scream, my entire body trembling violently. The thing's breathing changed. It became raspy, excited, as if it were reacting to my touch. My fingers grazed the flesh beneath the torn skin, sticky and soft like raw meat. That was as far as I could go. My courage shattered, and I pulled my hand away, clutching it to my chest as though it might protect me. I lay there trembling until the clock finally struck 3 a.m. The alarm shattered the suffocating silence, and the presence vanished instantly. I opened my eyes slowly, terrified of what I might see, but the room was empty. The only thing out of place was the 1,000 pesos neatly folded on the dresser. My trembling hands reached for the money, but I stopped. Something inside me screamed to leave it, to leave everything behind and never come back. I ran. For a month, I stayed away. I swore to myself I'd never return to that cursed house. But life had other plans. The bar I worked at came under scrutiny from local officials, and suddenly, all the girls were required to prove they were disease-free. Lab tests weren't cheap, and the managers only kept the girls who could provide results quickly. I was running out of options. I told myself it would be the last time, just one more night, one more 1,000 pesos. When 11 p.m. came, I was ready, or so I thought. The presence returned, bringing with it the same suffocating stench and the same slow, labored breathing. But this time, something was different. I wasn't frozen in terror like before. In fact, I found myself fighting the urge to sleep. The steady rhythm of its breathing, the stillness of the room, it was almost hypnotic. I don't know when I drifted off, but I was jolted awake by a dream. In the dream, there was a girl. She was young, with long, dark hair and deep, shadowy eyes. Her face was close to mine, so close I could feel her breath against my skin. "Leave," she whispered. Her voice was soft, pleading. "Leave." Her face began to change. Her skin turned pale, then blue. Her eyes bulged, bloodshot and terrified. She clutched at her throat, choking, gagging, as if an invisible hand was strangling her. I tried to reach out, but she dissolved into darkness, her choking sounds echoing in my ears. When I woke, the choking sounds hadn't stopped. They were real. The room was alive with noise, violent, horrifying sounds of struggle. Something was being torn apart. I heard the sickening squelch of flesh being carved, the rhythmic dripping of blood hitting the floor, and then footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. My entire body seized with terror. Every instinct screamed at me to open my eyes, to run, to fight. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by fear, trapped by the promise I had made to myself. Never open them. The footsteps stopped beside the bed. The thing was there again, its breath hot and rancid against my face. Minutes stretched into hours, and I thought I might go mad from the tension. But finally, mercifully, the alarm clock beeped. 3 a.m. The presence was gone. I opened my eyes to find the room empty once more. The 1,000 pesos was on the dresser, but I didn't care. I fled, leaving everything behind. The next morning I sought answers. I found the town captain, claiming I was sent by a wealthy client to inquire about the house. Years ago, a man lived there, the captain said. He was quiet, kept to himself. No one suspected anything until the neighbors reported a foul smell. When they broke into his home, they found him in his room with the body of a young girl. Her head had been severed, and he was holding it in his hands, just standing there, staring at it. They shot him on the spot. The captain handed me a photo. It was of the girl who had been murdered. She was young, no older than 16, and she was wearing a white sweater. The same sweater I had found in the thrift store. I felt the blood drain from my face. When I returned to my shanty, I discovered the sweater was gone. So was the note. My roommates swore they hadn't touched it, but I knew better. I quit my job as a call girl and found work as a caregiver for an elderly couple. It was hard and slow, but it was honest. I saved enough money to start college, vowing to leave my old life behind. But sometimes, as I passed the thrift store where I found the sweater, I can't help but wonder, what if I'd opened my eyes? Years later, I came across a newspaper article. It was a small story, buried among other reports of crime. A call girl had been found murdered. Her head had been severed. Her eyes were wide open. Michael sat on the bench, glancing at his watch as his foot impatiently tapped the ground. The bus was late today. That wasn't good for him at all. He needed to make a good impression at this interview. This job could be an important stepping stone in his career, He had to land it, and if the bus didn't hurry, he wouldn't make it in time. "Come on, hurry up," he muttered. "Let's get a move on." Nearly every second, a car drove by, but there was still no sign of the bus. He shivered just a little, just a slight shiver, but he was nervous. He glanced to the side and saw an old man sitting on the bench next to him, his bowler hat obscuring his eyes as he snored softly. Michael sighed, turning his attention back to the road where he was waiting for the bus. If only he could be like this guy, sleeping peacefully without a care. The old man looked quite advanced in age, probably retired for many years now and enjoying a carefree life. It would be many more years before Michael reached that level. Well, he'd only graduated with his bachelor's 3 months ago. His life was just beginning. His heart leapt as he saw the bus round the corner, and he sprang to his feet to be ready to board right away. He glanced back at the old man, wondering if he should wake him now that the bus had arrived. It was the right thing to do. Maybe this old-timer was trying to get somewhere too, and it wouldn't be right to let him sleep through his ride. Michael stepped away from the bus, shaking the old man. "Hey, the bus just got here," he said. The man's head lifted, eyes going wide as he swallowed a yawn. He glanced around for a moment, then his eyes fixed on Michael. 200,274, he said. "What?" 200,273. 200,272. 200,271. 200,000. Michael tried to speak up again, shaking the old man a bit harder. "Hey, the bus is here. You were waiting for it, right?" 200,268. 200,000. 267. 200,000. Michael rolled his eyes, stepping onto the bus. "Oh, forget it," he muttered. "Sometimes you just gotta leave the drunks alone, I guess." He grabbed the overhead rail and held steady as the bus lurched forward, getting ready to hear the good news he hoped for. He could barely feel his feet from nerves. He didn't think he'd be able to stand comfortably again until after the interview. However, as the interview ended, he wasn't sure he felt as light on his feet as he'd hoped. "Well, Mr. Sanchez, I have to say that so far I'm very impressed with you." The man stood from behind the desk and extended his hand, which Michael took. "Let me look over your file again along with Mr. Weiss, and I'll call you by the end of the week with the news." "Thank you, Mr. Wagner," Michael said. He was beaming. But the nervousness hadn't quite abated like he thought it would. But he'd done his best, and that was all that mattered. Now it was all left up to fate. He left Wagner's office and boarded the elevator to take him back down to street level. He'd go straight home and throw a hamburger on the stove for dinner. Some good steak seasoning could make even the cheapest frozen patties taste like fine dining. Maybe if Wagner called him back and told him he got the job, he'd go out and celebrate with a real steak. Have a full, hearty meal, not just whatever could fit in his tiny freezer at the apartment. He hurried off the bus. The more he thought about food, the more his stomach churned. He could almost taste that hamburger now. That man was there. The old man from yesterday, the drunk or druggie or whatever was going on with him. He was still there. Should I? Michael trailed off, shaking the thought away. No. Best to just move on. Do his own thing. 155,003. 155,002. 155,001. 154,000. Had he been sitting there counting all day? Just sitting there, staring at the sky and muttering numbers. Michael scoffed. "All right then, I'll leave him be. No need to help a junkie. He stepped past the man on the bench, just as he reached 154,988. Michael woke up the next morning to his phone ringing. He groaned, feeling like he'd only just closed his eyes. Even the melatonin he took didn't seem to help, since he only got to sleep around 3 in the morning. He was too anxious to let his body relax. He fumbled for the phone, grabbing it after a moment. Without looking at the screen, he swiped to answer and started speaking groggily into the mic. "Hello? Is this Michael Sanchez?" He sat bolt upright in bed as he recognized Mr. Wagner's voice. "Yes, speaking. Mr. Sanchez, I'm very pleased to tell you that we'll be expecting you at the office on Thursday morning. Can you commit to that?" Michael's heart leapt, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Today's Tuesday, right?" "Yes." "Yeah, I think I can make it on Thursday. Definitely." "Great. I look forward to working with you." "Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much." Goodbye for now." "Bye." Wagner hung up, and Michael fell back on the bed, pumping his fist in celebration. "Yes, I did it. I got it. Oh, I wish Mom was here." He glanced at the phone. It was past noon. Well, surely it wasn't too early for Texas Roadhouse to start serving steak right about now. Yeah, he knew it wasn't really a fancy place to get steak, but it still made his mouth water. "I got a shower." He leapt out of bed, stumbling to the bathroom and turning on the water. After a long, luxurious, hot shower, he stepped out to get dressed. He was grinning to himself the whole time, pulling on his sneakers and pocketing his phone as he headed out of the apartment. He stepped down the stairs to the street, walking out into the warm but crisp air. "Oh, it's a good day today." His smile faded a bit when he glanced at the bus bench. That man, he was still there, just sitting there, staring at the sky. He wasn't even looking when Michael shouted at him yesterday. Didn't he sleep at all? Did he eat anything? As far as Michael could tell, he hadn't left that spot or stopped counting since yesterday morning. The fool was going to die of thirst or starvation out here, and it would be no one's fault but his own. Well, he was just a bum. Why should Michael care? "Goodbye, weirdo," he said as he walked past. Michael was on top of the world when he got home that evening. He'd gotten the job that morning, or afternoon rather, and he'd met the most beautiful woman at the bar tonight. He'd gotten her number, the tiny slip of paper he clutched in his hand. "I'm king of the world," he shouted, grinning ear to ear. "No one can tell me otherwise." "Otherwise," a passerby said. "Oh, screw you," Michael snapped. In a moment, he was back to his drunken grin, kissing the tiny slip of paper in his hand. It was a beautiful string of numbers. A real, beautiful, wonderful string he had right here. A wonderful string from a wonderful girl. At least he hoped she was wonderful. She could be ugly, and the booze was tricking him. Either way, he was just glad to have a date this weekend, and it was all thanks to the string of numbers right here. Speaking of numbers, he was walking past the counting man again. 40,962, 40,961, 40,960. Michael giggled. "Maybe I'll join you, counting man. What number are you counting to?" 40,900. 55. Ha! The man just stared at the darkening sky, not giving Michael even a hint of acknowledgement. "Whatever. See you tomorrow?" He stepped past him, grinning ear to ear as he headed into the apartment and started up the stairs to his room. He didn't give himself time to take off his shoes before he collapsed into bed and fell into a death-like sleep. Michael woke up the next morning with a pounding headache. He rolled around in bed, trying to find a position that would make it go away, but ultimately failed. He groaned as he got out of bed, gritting his teeth as he walked to the bathroom to get some pain medication. Tylenol, he muttered, grabbing the bottle. He opened the cap and shook out a few pills, downing them from the faucet. Holding a mouthful of water, he popped the pills into his mouth and swallowed. Gotta remember not to drink so much. He yawned, checking his notifications on his phone before shoving his face back into the pillow. He glanced back out the window, grumbling and groaning. Maybe some fresh air would do me good, he mused. He took a deep breath, standing up and getting properly dressed, shoes and all. He stepped outside, phone in one pocket and keys in the other. It was unusually cold as he stepped out. He was about to head back in and grab a coat when he saw that man, still sitting there, staring at nothing and continuing to mutter his numbers. "This guy," he said. "He's insane." He started walking toward the bench, wondering what he was doing. Why? Why did he care so much? If the man hadn't stopped to eat or drink or sleep, then why should he care? It wasn't his health in danger, it was the fool's. Maybe he was just concerned because the man's health was in danger. He hadn't left that spot in days. "Hey, counting man," he shouted. "Do you want something to eat? I've got food up in my apartment. If you come with me, I'll give you some." 145, 144. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Are you hungry? You've been sitting there counting for days. Come on, I've got food and water if you want it." 129, 128. "Oh, for heaven's sake, it's useless. You're not going to listen to me, are you? Too busy counting." "Counting what? You're counting for no reason." The man suddenly shifted on the bench, still counting. He leaned down and grabbed something from the bag under his feet, a piece of paper. He scribbled something on it, then held it out to Michael. "Heartbeat?" Michael said, staring at the paper. "What the hell is that supposed to mean? 70, 69, 68, 67, 66. Come on, man, stop it. You don't need to keep counting. Come on, I've been watching you for days now. I'm worried about you. I'm a caring person, you know. I don't want you dying of thirst out here." 43, 42, 41, 40. "Are you ever going to answer me?" The man suddenly stood up, a mere 5 feet off the ground. He turned around, eyes wide as he continued spewing numbers. 34, 33, 32, 31, 30. "Okay, man, you're starting to scare me a little bit." 26, 25, 24, 23. "Come on, what are you doing? Why are you looking at me like that?" 18, 17, 16, 15. "Hey, aren't you going to say anything other than that? It's common human decency to answer when someone's talking to you." 9, 8, 7, 6. Michael felt himself begin to sweat, his throat closing up as his heart rate continued to increase. He was shaking, unsure why, but suddenly he wasn't feeling so well. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Suddenly there was a pain in Michael's chest, and he fell to the ground as he cried out. People within a 20-foot radius suddenly crowded around him, and he felt someone grab his wrist. "I'm not feeling a pulse. Someone call 911. This man is having a heart attack." Michael struggled to breathe, staring into the eyes of the counting man. "Call an ambulance. Hurry." Michael saw someone pull out their phone, dialing as quickly as they could. He just continued to stare at the counting man, who was now staring at the man who had climbed on top of Michael's chest and was performing CPR. The counting man's eyes narrowed, as if he was examining the man performing CPR thoroughly. He looked him up and down, then turned and walked away. 2,140,323. 2,140,322. Michael stared at the man on his chest, a sudden sinking feeling forming in his gut as the world around him grew hazy and dark, realizing that even 2 million wasn't very much. Thank you for listening to this chilling tale. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more stories that will send shivers down your spine.